I don't think I need to convince you much when I say that War Thunder has its fair share of problems. And there are already a number of people pointing out and talking about many of these problems. But I haven't found many that actively focus on solutions. So I have decided that I, War Thunder Jesus, will take this heavy burden upon myself and attempt to free all you sinful mortals from the pain that is War Thunder. And I will try to make it a fun game instead, in my new series, Fixing War Thunder. Very creative, I know. Where in each part I'll cover a specific problem or aspect from the game that needs to be fixed or could in some way be improved upon. And I'll start relatively in line with my existing content, and talk about matchmaking and how new nations could be added. You'll see in a bit how these two together make sense. Let's first go over some of the problems the current matchmaking system poses. And they aren't major, but I still want to talk about them. First of all, and this is more of a personal thing, but it's not historical at all, and it's quite frustrating. You almost never have a realistic fight for a game that claims to be so realistic. Secondly, and a bit more direct, it's not always super balanced. Certain countries together can just be way too strong. For instance, I've noticed that at low tier, Germany and the USSR together can be quite strong, as the USSR has very strong armor, and the Germans have all the strong guns to counter said armor. Skill-based matchmaking is also not a thing, which can be noticed at times, but this department is an absolute fucking dumpster fire with all the premiums being added, and skill-based matchmaking I have rarely seen properly work in other games apart from ranked systems, so I say we just ignore this part for now. Now again, these aren't all that major problems. And with the matchmaking being so simple, it does result in it being very fast, which is not to be underappreciated. But it's just uninspired, and I think more can be done with it. One thing I feel would help all these problems is the return of historical matchmaking. For those unaware, for the longest time it was so certain countries would only ever face certain countries, and would never be teamed up with them. The USSR and the USA, for instance, would only ever be teamed up together, and never be teamed up with Germany or other Axis powers. This not only made the game way more historical and realistic, but also way more balanced and fun. So, naturally, Gaijin removed it. But let's say Gaijin brought it back. Now, up to, say, 7.7 or 8.0, it would be the Allies versus the Axis powers, with Sweden being neutral, I guess. And after that, it would be NATO against the Warsaw Pact. Very creative suggestion here, I know, but I do think it's worth it. Now, I fully agree that gameplay should always be more important than a realism or historical accuracy. But I think we have come to a point where Gaijin has neglected realism to such an extent to where gameplay is now suffering from it as well. Like, Fulda is easily my favorite map in the game. I like the gameplay on it, it actually looks pretty good, and it feels like a real place where tanks would actually fight. I automatically enjoy playing on this map a lot more, purely because when I drive around in my Abrams there, I can actually envision this being a real place, where an Abrams would actually drive. And this immersion instantly makes the experience much more fun and enjoyable. Up until you get sodomized by yet another fucking KA-50 at least, but that's a story I'll cover another day, believe me. This is the feeling I am missing in this game. This immersion and being convinced that you're on a realistic battlefield. Now there are other ways to improve this as well, with map design, effects, sounds, and more, which I will make a video on in the future as well. But largely facing vehicles that the vehicle you're in would face in real life, I think greatly contribute to that as well. And this would be a huge improvement on that front. One problem I can see with this is that the Axis, and especially the Warsaw Pact sides, will have less nations than their opponents, and thus might have less players. But both Germany and the USSR are easily the two most played nations, so I doubt this will be a serious problem. In return though, you could experiment with matchmaking more, with stuff like asymmetrical teams. Is at a certain BR one team consistently stronger than the other? Just give the side that always loses 2 to 4 more players on their team. You could now also more easily make new game modes, where one side has to defend and the other team has to assault their positions, for instance. This might have been difficult before, as vehicles from certain nations might be better in either defending or attacking, and would suffer if they don't get their intended role. But now you know which nations will fight on which side, and you can easily adjust the battlefield or matchmaking accordingly. Vehicles like the Challengers might do well in dug-in defensive positions, so when they're on the defending team they might need less players. But while on the attacking team they might need a bit more. I don't know if this is actually the case, for the record, this is just an example. Alright, so we'll now face more or less the countries we would face in real life. And the game would be more balanced and fun. But there's still an issue. There are a lot of vehicles that fight among vehicles from completely different eras. Now some people have suggested to just place every vehicle at their historical battle rating, which I don't think will work. Some vehicles would be way too overpowered, while others would be completely useless. And again, gameplay should always be taken over realism. But I think I have found a way where you would face pretty much the same vehicles you would in real life historically, whilst still being fun and balanced. I want to suggest a complete rework of the matchmaking and battle rating system. First of all, vehicle selection in matches is no longer determined by your battle rating, but instead by your vehicle rank, or tier, or era, or whatever you want to call it. Sound familiar? Not the same ranks as they're currently in the game, bear in mind. Instead there would be probably 10, 11 ranks, and vehicles will be divided over these ranks mostly in terms of when they were historically used, instead of performance. Bear with me here, please. This might not be entirely accurate. Vehicles like the KV-1, oh yeah, this idea is based towards ground vehicles, by the way. I do not play enough aircraft to come up with something for that. And I can very well imagine this idea not working for aircraft at all. Anyway, vehicles like the KV-1 would have very little competition, so would be placed at a slightly higher rank. And some weaker vehicles, like a lot of the low-tier Swedish tanks, most of which are actually post-war designs, might be placed a little bit lower, but not much. I'll go further into this in a bit. Unlike in World of Tanks, you will not face up tiers or down tiers. You will only fight at your rank. You know what? We'll just throw away the entire battle rating system. Instead, every vehicle will be assigned a number of points. These are dependent on the vehicle's performance, and correlate to how many spawn points a vehicle will cost. The better a vehicle is, the more it'll cost to spawn. Now, why these points? First of all, it's way less limiting than the current battle rating system. Secondly, these points will be taken into account for your rewards when achieving a kill. And this will especially matter for the weaker vehicles. Let's take an example from whatever rank would be around the early 50s. You're playing France, and you come across an IS-4M, a pretty strong vehicle. This IS-4 would be worth, say, 1150 points. You are in your AMX-50, a vehicle of similar capabilities, and thus worth the same amount of points. You win and get the kill, but because you're both worth the same points, you only get the base rewards for the kill, which is, let's say, 200 research points just for the sake of simplicity. Now let's say you were in your dinky AMX-13 instead, a much weaker vehicle worth only maybe 550 points. You manage to outmaneuver and flank the IS-4M and take it out. You again get the base 200 RP for the kill, but because the IS-4 is worth 600 points more than your vehicle, you also get an additional 600 RP on top. See what I'm getting at here? Very weak vehicles will be much harder and riskier to use, but also way more rewarding. I should note that most vehicles that will now be weaker will be light tanks. For your idea, most light tanks will move roughly 2.0 BRs up, which I do not mind at all. Light tanks currently in the game are quite strong compared to other vehicles, and now they'll have to actually be used like light tanks and reconnaissance vehicles. The largest thing keeping a lot of light tanks down right now is low caliber APDS and HEAT-FS just sucking major monkey balls. So that would have to be fixed, along with maybe a reworked scouting system. Again, I want to make a separate video on this. But I'm not done yet. Now we have to fix the vehicles that would be way stronger. First of all, again, stronger vehicles would cost more points, but this is not enough. Some nations have way more than one very strong vehicle. Take late war Germany as an example. You would be able to work your way up to one of these vehicles and then very easily earn more than enough points to spawn in the rest of these very strong vehicles. So let's fix this. We'll take the 1944 rank for this example. This rank will consist of vehicles like 76 Shermans and T-34s against Panthers and Tiger 1s. Vehicles like the Pershing, IS-2, King Tiger and the Yak Tiger did mostly appear in this year already in real life, but are instead placed in the 1945 rank. Now when making your vehicle lineup you have a number of base slots where you can place any vehicle of the rank or from lower ranks, exactly like how it is now. Next to this though, you get an additional elite vehicle slot, where you can place one vehicle of the next rank. But the base point value of the vehicle here would be increased by a good bit, maybe doubled or so. This vehicle will now always cost more points than you get at the beginning of the match. So everyone starts out with vehicles from the same rank. But if you earn enough points, similarly to how you can spawn in a nuke, you'll be able to earn enough points to use your elite vehicle, which you can only spawn once per match. So now you can still take out your Tiger II in the 1944 rank against Shermans and T-34s, but you have to earn it. Of course, the allies will be able to do the same. The Tiger II will still be by far the strongest, but the other allied vehicles might be slightly cheaper. So for every 2 King Tigers your team has, the enemy team will have 3 to 4 Pershings and Dice 2s. Not to mention, those elite vehicles are worth an absolute ton of points, so everyone will be hunting you. This way, an enemy vehicle that is in a down tier, quote unquote, is now a sort of mini-boss that the team will have to work together for to take out, and will be greatly rewarded for doing so. This also makes it more historical and immersive, as those very strong vehicles were often a thing, but were a rare sight, same as they would be now. This also fixes issues when researching, because up and down tiers no longer exist. Like if you unlock a vehicle of the next rank and you really want to use that vehicle, you don't have to go play that higher rank with just one vehicle, and instead you can just throw it into your elite slot, until you've unlocked 1 or 2 more vehicles from the next rank. This is my grand idea. A lot of weaker tanks, which will be mostly light tanks, will have to be used like actual scout vehicles, instead of just being better, and need to be used way more carefully, but people doing this will be very handsomely rewarded for it. And vehicles that were historically really strong can still be played in this role, but you have to earn it and you have to use it wisely. This general concept also way enhances the previously mentioned ideas. You can now utilize asymmetric teams in a more historical way as well. The Soviet T-64 and T-72, for instance, were very strong when they were first put into service, with NATO mostly having vehicles like early Leopard 1s and M60s at the time. But they had many more of them, which you can do the same way in game now as well. Give the Soviets at this rank stronger vehicles but less overall players. In later ranks this would switch, with NATO now having the Leopard 2 and M1A1 Abrams, but the Soviets in return can now spam T-80s and T-72s. This is not yet entirely perfect though, as not everyone will have the strongest vehicles of the rank, or won't have as many, or might not have an elite vehicle unlocked yet. To counter this, every vehicle will have an additional, invisible, strength point count as well. Average vehicles would be 1 strength point, weaker vehicles only half a point, and very strong vehicles maybe up to 1.5 or 2 strength points, with elite units maybe 4 or 5 strength points. Then the matchmaker will look over every vehicle in your lineup and determine how many points this is in total. It'll do the same with a bunch of other players and make it so both teams have at least nearly the same strength level. I have been thinking about this idea a lot and for a long time, and I truly believe it could work, with testing of course. Alright, now that I have properly fried your brains with my terrible explanations, let's talk about adding new countries to War Thunder. Gaijin doesn't seem very interested in new countries for some reason, and instead just goes for more copy-paste every single time. Very cool. New countries could be added as either full new tech trees or as subtrees for existing nations. But seeing as in a recent Q&A, Gaijin has said they won't add any new trees this year, it's just subtrees for now. Those who've watched my previous videos though, will know that I advocate for countries to get their own tech trees as much as possible. I think subtrees often limit the amount of vehicles a country can get, and I always think they should get as many as possible. Though I do see the argument of countries often having a lot of copy-paste and or not having enough vehicles to create proper lineups. Be not afraid, for I have once again found a solution. Every single country will now have their own tree, but trees will be divided over major and minor trees. I think this kinda speaks for itself. Countries with more than enough vehicles for their own tech tree would get a major tree, and the ones that don't get minor ones. Minor tech trees are always tied to one or more major ones. Let's take Pakistan as an example, which I have covered previously on the channel. Pakistan was part of the British Empire, and is now in good relations with China. Pakistan also doesn't really have any rank 1 vehicles, so you'd have to play China or Britain up to rank 2 to unlock the Pakistan tree. Now, if at a certain rank you feel like you can't make proper lineups though, you can now place your Pakistan vehicles in your Chinese lineup, and fill the rest with other Chinese vehicles. I do want to encourage the use of just one nation's vehicles though, so you get a small bonus if you do take just Pakistani vehicles. Your lineup might be pretty weak compared to those of others, but with the invisible strength count and the point system I talked about previously, this could still be balanced. But if you feel like you don't have enough vehicles for a lineup, you can place your vehicles in the lineup of one of the major trees tied to it, as long as it makes sense for the matchmaker. Taking Pakistan again, at higher tiers, China and Britain would be on opposite sides, the Warsaw Pact and NATO respectively. So here Pakistan can only be teamed up with China. Yes, I think the side on which a country fights can differ per rank. Let's take Poland, which I also just covered. Poland in the interwar period fought Russia a little bit, but was pretty good friends with Britain, so we'll make Poland neutral for rank 1, i.e. Poland can be placed on either team. During the Second World War, Poland mostly fought against the Nazis, so they'll be placed on the Allied side for those ranks. After the war, Poland became part of the Warsaw Pact and would fight NATO up until the early 90s rank, where they would now join the NATO side and instead fight Russia and its allies. This is again not entirely perfect, and each country would have to be looked at individually. India, for instance, is good friends with Russia, but not so much with China. But seeing as India uses a lot of Soviet designs, it would still make sense to place them on the Warsaw Pact side. Alternatively, you could just make them neutral again. Now we have fixed the problem of smaller countries maybe having weaker militaries. But there's one more big issue, something I get comments about regularly when talking about new nations that could be added. Copy, paste. Once again, I think these should be added, and I'll explain why. I, as a Dutchman, am very sad that we somehow still do not have a Dutch/Benelux subtree yet, or even a full tech tree. I would love to get Dutch Centurions, Shermans and Leopards, with Dutch camos and voice lines and all. The same way I can imagine people from Finland wanting all their copy-paste vehicles alongside their original ones, or those from Spain or any other country. Now there are two big problems with copy-pasted vehicles currently in the game. Well, three if you count the fact that we've been getting absolutely nothing but copy-paste for a while now, but firstly is both teams constantly having the same exact vehicles, and constantly facing the same exact vehicle you're in. This we have already almost entirely fixed though, with the return of historical matchmaking. Most copy-paste vehicles will now almost always be on the same team. It doesn't matter if you and your T80 fight 4 German Leopard 2A4s, or a Dutch, Finnish, Polish and Spanish one. There are some outliers to this, but these are few and far between and will mostly be negligible, I think. The other large issue with copy-paste is constantly having to research the same exact vehicle over and over again. Nice and all that all 58 different Leopard 2A4s are now all on the same team, but you still have to research 58 identical Leopard 2A4s. My fix for this is actually very simple. Once you've researched one Leopard 2A4, all the other identical ones get a huge discount in their research amount. Maybe now you'll only need to get about 10% of each research points for each other Leopard 2A4. This number can also be adjusted depending on how much the vehicle is modified. Does the alternate vehicle get, say, a new gun sight and some other stuff tacked onto it? Maybe you'll now need to research 25% of the vehicle instead of 10%. Does the alternate vehicle get an entirely new gun and additional thermals? Then you only get a 25% discount, and you have to research 75% of the vehicle still. Vehicles like the Leopard 2PL, M60 AMPT or T72 M2 Moderna I'd say are modified to such an extent that they don't need the discount bonus at all. That's it. These are my ideas. But these are just concepts though. I'd love to hear your input and especially let me know if I'm overlooking something. But I believe these are pretty solid ideas if implemented properly. Especially the matchmaking remake idea, I'm really excited for, and I think it'd be a huge improvement. Now I am aware that Gaijin looks at its player base and their feedback the same way women look at me. They don't, but we can still hope. I'm very excited to make more episodes for this series, like the ones mentioned throughout the video, and I have several more planned as well. The new nations videos are not going away, don't worry. In fact, the next one will be one. On my Poland video I asked which nation to cover next, and replies seem to be tied between Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, and so I'll probably set up a poll to decide, so stay tuned for that. Now subscribe.